Thank you for joining Gowling WLG for this Employment, Labour and Equalities podcast. We are an international law firm working in major sectors including energy, life sciences, infrastructure, financial services, real estate and technology. Our episodes cover the latest developments relevant to you across different sectors and services. Make sure you subscribe to receive the latest episodes of this podcast. Visit our website gowlingwlg.com for all of our latest insights.
Hello, I'm Anna Fletcher, a legal director in the Employment, Labour and Equalities team at Gowling WLG. And today I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Jocelyn Corley, who's a partner in the commercial IT and outsourcing team and one of our data protection specialists. Today, Jocelyn's going to be talking about some of the data protection issues likely to impact on employers as we return to the office and in some cases introduce hybrid or blended working models post-pandemic. So, Jocelyn, what are the key issues that we need to be considering as employers begin to return people to the workplace?
So the issues will be probably slightly different for everyone, depending on the particular working practices that you're changing. The simple change from working in the office to working at home, some organisations will have had quite a small privacy impact because you're still processing the same data, the same purposes as you were. It's just that everyone is physically now sat at home rather than in the office. The obvious area there that most employers and companies have looked at is the security aspect. Are people using company provided equipment? Are people using their own personal equipment? How secure are home Wi-Fi systems? How do the access protocols work? Do systems allow people logging in from IP addresses from different locations, potentially even different countries, as some employees have gone home if they are from overseas originally? So I think that simple moving from an office to working from home has had less of an immediate privacy impact if companies are not collecting more or different types of data. Where we've seen a bigger impact is around maybe the return to office, as employers have had to put in systems to ensure health and safety of employees, which has then necessitated collecting more data. If you're asking people those COVID type questions about have you had a cough, have you had a fever, who you've been in contact with, organisations have had to think about how they're collecting that data. Are they retaining it? If they are, where is it being held and who can access it? So you'd have had to look at maybe do a DPIA around that to establish what the risks might be and ensure you understand your legal grounds of processing that data, given that it is going to be health data, therefore special category data, and you have a more limited list of grounds that apply that enable you to process and handle that data. And then as you sort of blend to a hybrid model and you have people in the office and out of the office, and particularly as the vaccination programme progresses, I know companies have been looking at understanding their obligations or their ability maybe to ask employees about vaccinated status and trying to manage the health and welfare of all employees as you bring people back into the office. And maintain social distancing and looking at your risk assessment of all the working practices in the office, or maybe not in an office, maybe in a manufacturing plant where people have to come into closer contact. The risk assessments become more difficult and you're trying to balance keeping your operations running and your people's individual needs around their own vaccination status, or if they are shielding, or remember the household is shielding, how those interact with each other, and to what extent employers can ask questions about whether they've been vaccinated or whether they have other health considerations for family members that employers need to take into account in order to be able to do their risk assessments from a COVID point of view to make sure that the working practices they're establishing are actually going to keep employees safe. So I think that it's that when you start gathering additional data that all the data protection obligations kick in and employers need to be thinking about doing DPIAs to establish they're doing these things in the right way, and then the knock-on effects that has, maybe updating privacy notice to employees, updating your statutory documentation like your record of processing, making sure you have all your accountability documentation in place.
Is there any specific guidance, Jocelyn, in relation to the impact assessments that employers need to be carrying out if, for example, they adopt a much more flexible model where people are working from home and people are working in offices?
Not guidance in terms of a piece of ICO documentation or policy that we can point to, but documentation generally is very important to data protection, so that organizations can evidence that at the time they made certain decisions, this was the thought process, these are the data flows as they understood them at that time, and they have done the risk analysis to understand their grounds of processing, check they're not processing more data than they ought to be, check they understand how it's going to be accurately stored, only accessed as appropriate, etc. So it is important that organizations create those records, because increasingly we see the regulators focusing on the accountability principle under the legislation. If you look back at the ICO's website now and the number and the volume of materials they have on accountability versus what there was 3 years ago, there's a huge amount more, as they've really drilled into practically what that means for organizations and the steps that organizations should be taking to show that they are accountable for the data they process and the way that they do it.
Would you recommend that for anybody who's listening, who's working within HR, that there should be a collaborative approach between HR, the people who are responsible for data protection, whether that's a data protection officer, and perhaps your health and safety managers, that people are working more closely together perhaps than in the past?
I think absolutely COVID has necessitated that. And when I talk to clients about data protection, one of the big challenges is that where you end up in terms of your legal analysis is completely driven by the context in which you are working. So as you say, it's absolutely critical that you are talking amongst the HR specialists, the health and safety specialists, and then people with the privacy knowledge. Because if you're doing a risk assessment, you have to understand the full picture. And clients I've been talking to, it's often the privacy position is part of the health and safety risk assessment rather than the other way around, because health and safety risk assessment is trying to establish what are the working practices we need to set up. And that might say, well, we need to gather data from individuals to understand if they have been in contact with anyone who's tested COVID positive, when they last had their lateral flow test, etc. And so it feeds into the health and safety risk assessment to then you justify the need to collect and process that data to do with linking to your obligations as an employer to keep people safe at work. So absolutely, these specialists and SMEs need to be working closely together to make sure that the overall balance of what the employer or the organization is trying to achieve is going to be met, and that you're using the personal data you need to achieve that end, but no more, and using it in the right way.
And so for organisations that are looking possibly at introducing hybrid working policies so that employees understand their obligations, again, are there any specific data protection issues that should be picked up in those policies? I'm thinking particularly, you mentioned earlier about people working from home, the use of their own equipment perhaps, or employer provided equipment. Are there things that employers should be thinking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ICO does have guidance on things like BYOD, bring your own device, if employers are looking to enable employees to bring their own devices. There is also advice in the employer's guide about things like remote monitoring. Some employers who've been maybe less familiar with hybrid working or home working coming into the pandemic have had to understand what they can and can't do in terms of understanding what employees are doing when they're not physically on premises. There is existing guidance on that and how far you can go and where you draw that line. There's also guidance about general security obligations under GDPR. So the security obligation is to use appropriate technical and organizational measures. The organizational measures are things like a sort of physical environment and physical security. So whereas companies did have things like locked drawer policies and clear desk policies, how do you translate that into a home environment, control of printed documents, how are those going to be disposed of, those kinds of issues? Yes, absolutely. There is existing guidance on those kinds of issues. Probably won't be branded as hybrid working, but certainly issues that the regulators have thought about when, just in terms of where data might be moved to as people go about their daily lives. I suppose now if you are doing your risk assessment and looking at volumes of data that might be outside of such tight company control because they're off premises, that will have increased dramatically with everybody working from home. And so from a risk point of view, thinking about, well, if that is now a greater risk, are there other things we need to be doing? One of which could, as you say, be giving training to employees about don't forget when you're working from home or in other places, how you should be acting, being conscious of conversations being heard, thinking about what you do with hard copy documents, all those kinds of issues.
It's very interesting because I know there's been quite a lot of research about this, the increase in the purchasing by employers of kind of monitoring equipment reported during the course of the pandemic. So obviously it's really important for employers to know what their legal obligations are, and what you've said, not at all straightforward necessarily to navigate some of those issues.
Quite, yes. And because it's always in a different context for every organisation, it is quite dangerous, I think, when someone comes to me and says, oh, well, I know my friend in company X, they do this. I think, well, they may well have a perfectly good justification for doing that, even though I'm telling you I don't think it's appropriate for you in your organisation, because the extent to which you can monitor and survey employees like that, again, is all down to what are they doing? Can you reasonably justify that? Are you doing it in a covert manner or an open manner, etc.? So that is a new topic that some people have had to look at. Another interesting one I've come across, which I think has come more to the fore now that employees are not, as a default, based in their offices, is thinking about business continuity risks. So not particularly in light of pandemic, not the risk of lots of people suddenly becoming ill, but from a location perspective. I've seen more inquiries about if people were to not be in the office, see that travelling or working from home, should the employer be keeping track of where individuals are, so that if there was some kind of external risk, so I'm thinking really unusual things like terrorist risks or potentially natural disasters, that an employer would be able to notify employees that they knew were in those locations, to warn them about them, help them get themselves to a place of safety. Again, that's quite a step away from where we've been previously, which is that everyone's based in an office. People, yes, travel, but to what extent does an employer actually track that travel? I've had people asking about, can I enable a location device on a mobile phone so I know precisely where my employees, when they're on their business trips overseas, is that justified? Or do I just need to know the hotel they're in, or the city they're in? So if it was a country where civil unrest was something that was reasonably likely, then I'd be able to communicate with my employee and help them get themselves to somewhere safe.
So from what you're saying, it's very much a very fact-specific issue for each business to consider, weighing up its requirements and, obviously bearing in mind, of course, the obligation that you have as an employer to ensure the health and safety of your workforce, very much about establishing that justification.
Precisely, yes, based on your own specific facts and circumstances. So to the extent that lots of employees work in offices, people probably come out in very similar places on those risk assessments. You vary much more when you get into people who have manufacturing facilities or warehouses where people are moving around more or have to base themselves around things that are not desks, essentially, and the extent to which they then have to come into closer contact or can be further away. Those are the factors that then vary to a much greater degree.
And what are the consequences of getting this wrong?
As with any potential GDPR risk, it is the usual range of enforcement action that the ICO has. So everything from coming and asking to do some kind of consensual audit, or asking for information about your processing practices, all the way through to enforcement notices that you have to comply with as a matter of law, or the big one that everyone knows about, the fines that could potentially be imposed for a breach of GDPR. I think the guidance that the ICO put out going back to the start of the pandemic recognised that a lot of employers would be looking at some new issues, particularly around understanding health information of employees, and employers may be capturing more data if people had to go on site, so temperatures were being taken and those COVID questions were being asked. But I think the the tone of the expectation has now changed, and that we've been living with these kinds of new considerations for some time now. They're no longer so new. So I think if the ICO were to come across areas of non-compliance, they'd be less understanding now than they would have been 12 months ago, when companies and employers were understandably looking at a very wide range of brand new issues and having to make a lot of decisions really quite quickly, where you could understand if processes were less thorough or documentation not immediately put in place. The ICO is a very reasonable organisation in that sense and pragmatic, but now we'll probably take a different view now that we're a year down the line.
So what I'm hearing there is that having your paperwork in order is really important. Ensuring that you have appropriate training in place that picks up any changes in approach or best practice, even if there's not a change in the law, and that cooperation with the ICO is going to hopefully help you as an organisation avoid enforcement notices and the potential risk of fines. From my perspective, that's been really, really helpful, Jocelyn. I just want to thank you for taking us through those issues so clearly. I hope that it's given our audience a really good insight into the plethora of data protection issues they need to be considering in the circumstances. And obviously, if any of you listening have any specific data protection questions, please do contact Jocelyn and her team. They'd be very happy to help you.
Thank you for listening to this Gowling WLG podcast. If you liked this episode, please be sure to check out our website, gowlingwlg.com, for more useful podcasts and articles, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast to join us for our next episode.